Hello, everyone. I'm joined today by Sumant Sinha, my good friend, who's the CEO of Renew Power, a leading renewable energy company in India. Welcome, Sumant.
Thank you so much, Emma.
Yeah, it's been great. I've been following your journey for so many years. Can you tell us a little bit about your 10-year journey with this company and how you started and where you're at now?
It's been a while, no, Emma. 10 years is a long time. Look, I started this company back in 2011 with a view to essentially, focusing a little bit on climate change and seeing how one could actually address the problem. Even back then, it was clear to me, at least, that climate change would become a pretty serious issue going forward. And India also had this issue of energy and electricity deficits. And renewable energy seemed to be a good way to solve both those problems. Although, of course, at that point in time, renewables was really wind energy at that time and was more expensive than conventional power. But over the years, since we've been at it, renewables have now become a lot cheaper than any other form of electricity, and therefore it's really become now in some ways the mainstream new power addition source. So there's been a very significant change in our sector over the years. As far as our own company is concerned, we raised our first investor was Goldman Sachs, who actually came in fairly early into our company and committed a reasonably good amount of equity very early on in our evolution. That got us started, and then we went out, hired people, started executing projects in India, which, as you know, is not an easy proposition to go out into the back of beyond, acquire land, build roads, deal with all the local issues and local problems. So in some ways, it was learning by fire, but we went in and we dealt with all the issues as they arose. And over the years, we built a good team and we built a good expertise, and we've really understood now how to add capacity and do projects in India. We've now got 5.6 gigawatts or 5,600 megawatts of commissioned wind and solar capacity, and another 4,000 odd that we're constructing right now. So we hope to cross 10,000 megawatts in the next 2 years. This makes us, in commission capacity terms, in India, the largest company and the 10th largest in the world. And just given the size and scale of the Indian market and the growth in the future, I have no doubt that the Indian market is going to, give us opportunities to become significantly and substantially bigger as we go forward. So it's been an interesting journey. It's been a very learning-oriented journey, but it's been a journey with a sense of purpose that one has been able to, address some of the issues that one had set out to address. We now generate almost 1% of India's total electricity production and help mitigate about 0.5% of India's total carbon emissions. So I think we've had some impact. Hopefully that will increase as we go forward.
Fantastic. It's been a terrific 10 years. So looking ahead, what do you see for the next 5 to 10 years? I know there's been a shift in types of renewable power, wind versus solar, and also your future. Can you talk a little bit more about what the future holds for you and the market in general?
Yeah, sure. So, we're in the midst of a couple of different energy transitions happening at the same time. And in the history of humanity, we've seen a couple of such transitions happen when we went from biomass to coal, and then, coal, at some point, oil and gas added on to coal. But right now, we're going through two different energy transitions simultaneously. Now, what those are number one, more and more things are getting electrified. Automobiles, for example, are getting electrified. At some point, you'll have the opportunity of hydrogen coming in, green hydrogen coming in, and that will then extend the ambit of electricity into other areas of energy. And so in some senses, the first revolution that is happening is deepening electrification. Electricity has represented only a quarter of total energy consumption. That percentage is going to go up quite dramatically over the years. So that's one. The second energy transition, in some ways the more obvious one, the one that we started with, really was the greening of electricity, which is that you have more and more renewable energy now coming in. And today, renewables are still only about 10% of the electricity mix. But over the next 5 to 10 years, that number is forecast to grow very substantially. And certainly in countries like India, where there is also the growth of the electricity sector just on account of poor electricity consumption on a per capita basis, you will see growth in electricity happening on account of that. And so therefore, most of that will come from renewable energy. And so as we look to the future, it's very simple. We just have to keep adding more and more wind farms, solar farms. But of course, within the market, there'll be changes. You can't just dump intermittent renewable energy with just wind when the wind blows, or sun when the sun shines, into the grid. You'll have to have the ability of smoothing it out and managing your demand side curves as well. And so you'll need to have more intelligent renewable energy coming in. So that's going to be, I think, a big change that we see going forward. And therefore, storage, green hydrogen, and those kinds of things will become a bigger part of the mix. So it's going to be very exciting. And the sector is going to grow very rapidly going forward as well.
Fantastic. I mean, I think the future holds is very bright, which also means you need more capital, more resources. So what's on the cards for your company going public, getting more capital, doing those kinds of things? Is that something under consideration?
Oh, absolutely. I think, as you rightly said, this is a very capital intensive sector. 1 megawatt of a wind farm costs you about $1 million, and about $600,000-$700,000 for 1 megawatt of solar. And we need many tens of thousands of megawatts. And the expectation is that just in India, we need at least $500 billion over the next 10 years. And those are pretty large numbers. And globally, those numbers are, of course, going to be even bigger. Now, as far as we are concerned, over the last 10 years of our history, we've raised about $7 billion of total capital between equity and debt capital. Half of this has come from sources outside of India. So either through the international bond markets or through global investors. And the interesting thing is that all of our equity capital has been raised from investors looking to invest in India. So outside investors. We are now at a point where we're about to list on the NASDAQ. And that will also be a fairly significant change for us in terms of the opportunity to access deeper pools of capital and capital that is looking for opportunities in the ESG space as well. So I think capital raising is going to be a very fundamental part of what we do. Hiring people, training them is going to be another big resource area for us that we'll have to build up. And we'll have to really discover a lot of things, keeping an eye on technology evolution, because technology in our sector is changing so rapidly that if you don't keep an eye on what's happening, you can get very quickly disintermediated out of the market. And so you really have to have a very strong focus on the tech side as well. And we've spent a lot of effort on building our organization. So we've spent a lot of time in digitalizing our company and all of our assets. We've spent a lot of effort to build the organization from a long-term sustainable standpoint. Because my view, MR, has been that, look, the company today is what it is. But I can see that 5 or 10 years later, we'll be multiple times our current size. We'll have many more people. We'll have many more assets on the ground. We have today 110 sites across different parts of India. In the next 5 years, that could be double of that. In 10 years, it could be triple or quadruple of that. So you need to invest in systems and processes. And if you don't build the organization as much as you build your business, at some point that will become a constraining factor. And so building the organization and addressing all the constraining factors is really critical to achieving our targets.
Terrific. Let's move on to another big part of sustainability. COP26 is coming up in Scotland, and lots of things are happening. So what do you see the MNCs in India doing, the large corporates in India? How are they starting to make commitments and address sustainability and meeting the India's commitments to the globe?
Well, that's an interesting question, because in India, the thinking around climate change conversations has been that it's more of a government thing. And therefore, the Indian government has to do what it has to do. Corporates and civil society in general has not taken any real onus or responsibility upon themselves. Now, that is beginning to change at a very, very incipient level right now. Civil society, because of all the pollution problems that we face, certainly in North India, at certain points of the year, as you know, it becomes almost impossible to breathe the air. And so therefore, that's something that is really impelling people to think about pollution first, but climate change also more broadly. As far as corporates are concerned, I think the conversations are just beginning to start now. And certainly for multinational companies, the pressure is coming from their overseas, headquarters and so on, where ESG investing has become a very, very big theme. As you know, almost half of the world's large fund managers have now said that they're going to focus much more significantly on ESG. And that, as well as banks saying that they lend more and more to ESG sectors, is beginning to put pressure now on large multinationals. And we're beginning to see some parts of that beginning to reflect in their India operations. It's still at a very early stage, though, I must tell you. And most corporates, unfortunately, MR, I must say, while they have these ESG mandates and they have this not to climate change, if it costs them a lot of money, they don't want to do it. Right? So they only want to do it if it's economically sensible and it's cheaper for them. Then they'll say, yeah, terrific, we'll do it, right? But I think getting it to a point where they really start doing it because it's the right thing to do and it's a good thing to do, even though it costs more, that they have not made that transition yet. Now, the good news is that technology is coming to our aid, and we are finding that solutions are becoming cheaper and cheaper. And we are now able to provide electricity to corporates, which is at prices that are lower than what they would have got from the grid, which is, as you know, mostly dirty power. And so therefore, I'm optimistic that over the next few years, we'll see more and more corporates begin the shift towards sourcing clean energy more directly. And that pressure hopefully then begins to manifest itself.
Yeah, as you know, Sumant, here in the US where I live, lots of corporations have now made net zero commitments and all those things. Hopefully, like you said, that'll permeate to their operations in India, but also local corporates will look at it and kind of join the fray, if you will. So that's on the corporate side. Now, you talked a little bit about technology. Let's dive into that a little bit more, because the tech sector in India is now booming. They're getting tons of funding and going public, and also the MNCs have set up so many accelerators and incubators in India. What do you see the role of technology as we kind of play out the sustainability initiatives?
Well, I would say that technology has been a massive enabler for the growth and the greening of renewable energy and the electricity sector in general. And that's been one of the big positives that we've had in our sector over the last 10 years. Solar prices have come down from about 25 cents a kilowatt hour down to about 3 cents a kilowatt hour over the last 10 years. Wind has gone from about 10 cents, 12 cents a kilowatt hour down to about 4 cents a kilowatt hour. And so these changes have been enabled by advances in materials technology, in manufacturing technology, and in efficiency gains and so on. And this is going to continue. And as that continues, you will see more and more renewable energy becoming cheaper and cheaper compared to conventional sources of power. And therefore, things like coal, nobody wants to invest in coal any longer. At some point, gas is also going to get left behind. Now, as we look beyond just wind and solar, the same thing is going to play out in storage, in batteries, that is. And we've seen battery prices come down from about $400, $500 a kilowatt hour down to about $200 a kilowatt hour in the last couple of years. And again, the reduction is happening faster than people could have predicted. And that's really terrific and tremendous. And exactly the same thing is going to happen in the area of green hydrogen, where people are beginning now to realize the importance of hydrogen in the energy systems, where it can start replacing on the mobility side through, at least in public and mass transportation. Also, it can get into refineries, into fertilizer manufacturing, a whole host of areas. And all of that hydrogen will be made from water by electrolysis using clean energy. And so suddenly you go from gray hydrogen using gas and methane to clean hydrogen. And that's going to be a massive, it's going to be massively enabled by technology changes, which I think will play out over the next 5 to 7 years. But now, you know what, Emma, people have learned their lesson. They now know that you don't bet against technology. And, people now know that if this happened in solar, it's certainly going to happen in batteries, and it's certainly going to happen in hydrogen. So people are already now anticipating that and making plans accordingly. And that's really positive, I think.
Yeah, Sumant, the other thing that was happening a few years ago, everybody started talking about smart cities, IoT, all that kind of stuff. How do you see that fitting in your scheme? Because obviously, balancing supply and demand is a great thing for everyone, and these smart cities can enable much of that type of systems. So, is that still something in the cards for cities in India?
It's not so much a by city thing. I think it's more an issue of managing utilities, managing their demand and supply much more efficiently. And, we're going from an era where you had generation happening through fixed coal-based plants or nuclear or hydro, energy flowing in one direction into the consumption centers. Right now, you'll have a grid of the future, which is going to have a much more democratized generation, people generating on their rooftops, right? Power flowing in multiple directions, and much more flexible grid management, where you shape your supply side to meet your demand curves and vice versa, because you can do time of day pricing and so on. And managing all of that is going to require a high degree of technical capability and digital capability. And that is really the direction in which grids of the future are going to have to head to. And there, also obviously using ancillary services such as batteries and so on is going to play a big role. So I think it's going to be very exciting. And I think digital is going to be very, very critical in how people are able to do forecasting and scheduling and managing all of these bi-directional, multi-directional flows.
So let's talk about the consumer. I think you were talking about the demand supply side. In the US, for example, we can go in online and choose your power supplier to be a green supplier versus a dirty coal supplier and so forth. So do you see regulations in India changing? Do you see consumers starting to demand that their power coming to their house is going to be green? I mean, do you see that happening?
Yeah. I think it's going to happen at some point. And the government is certainly working towards it. Unfortunately, the Indian power sector is one of the big unreformed sectors, unfortunately, of the Indian economy. Utilities are still owned by state governments. The regulatory frameworks are not that strong, and the pricing of tariff of the power that is sold to consumers, half the customers don't pay for it. It's still very political, right? So the central government is working on a plan to de-license the whole sector. Let anybody produce the supply power. Let the wire-owning company be independent of the power supplying company. And then you can actually have exactly what you said, which is anybody can buy power from a number of different sources. Anybody can supply. I could, for example, become a purveyor of pure green electricity to customers who wanted exactly that and were willing to pay for it. So you'll have those kinds of things then beginning to happen. I think we're still a couple of years away from that kind of reform, but I'm hopeful that it will play out because that ultimately is very, very critical for us.
Because I think ultimately, as we all know, if consumers really start a movement of demanding these things, changes tend to happen more rapidly with corporations, right, and governments. So
that's true, absolutely.
Great. So we're almost getting to the end of our session here, Sumant. I've got a few rapid fire questions for you. So just answer in short bursts of consciousness, if you will.
Okay.
So which country will lead the global narrative on sustainability?
I think it's probably going to be Europe. And I recognize that Europe is not a country, but it's really the European Union has been leading the narrative on and taking the lead on climate change quite substantially.
Right. Which industry will play a catalyzing role in taking us forward rapidly?
Which industry? I think the clean energy industry. I think it's going to revolutionize the way energy is generated. And when I say energy, I don't mean electricity. I mean the broader energy space. And you'll see a lot more investments happening in this sector and a lot more job creation as well.
Will we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030?
I doubt it very much because some of those goals are are not as sharply defined. But I don't think those goals are meant to be achieved very quickly, because if they were achieved quickly, then they probably weren't ambitious enough to begin with. So I think we have a ways to go before we can achieve all the SDG goals.
all electric vehicles or 100% renewable energy? Which one is the more likely reality?
I think both are going to happen. And I think they're going to happen feeding into each other as well. You'll have 100% electric vehicles being powered by 100% clean energy. And that's the future.
And finally, your go-to sustainability catchphrase or mantra?
It has to be that we have to make the planet cool again.
Awesome. On that note, thank you so much, Sumant, for this amazing session. And back to you, the Zinnov folks. Thank you.